Thank you so much for coming this evening. I'm Kevin Rummenson. I'm the Associate University Librarian for Administrative Services here at the UCI Libraries. And I would like to welcome you for coming on a rainy day and spending your evening with us at this great event. So before we get to our main program, I would like to start our evening by acknowledging our presence on the traditional and unceded territory of the Hashiman and Tongva peoples. And then to introduce the program, tonight we are celebrating the opening of the UCI Library's latest exhibit, Electrifying Music, the untold story of Remy Gassmann, which will remain on display in the Langston Library lobby through December. UCI Libraries is honored to have the Remy Gassmann papers in our Special Collections and Archives department. Materials from the papers in our library music collection were used in the Electrifying Music exhibit to tell the story of and legacy of Remy Gassmann, an American composer and pioneer in electronic music and sound. Best known for his innovative ballet scores and his soundtrack to Alfred Hitchcock's film, The Birds, Gassmann helped introduce 20th century audiences to new musical aesthetics and compositional styles and champion the emerging works of his contemporaries. The exhibit also features an array of visually stunning graphic scores and traces of historical milestones in electronic sound and music. Next, I would like to acknowledge our two wonderful curators of the exhibit. Please join me in congratulating them on their superb work. The first is our research librarian for performing arts, Scott Stone. And then our second is UCI PhD student in integrated composition, improvisation, and technology, Oliver Brown. I would also like to acknowledge some special people in the audience. Nick Gassmann, the nephew of Remy Gassmann, is here tonight with some other family members of the Gassmann family, and they flew in from, I believe, Minnesota to join us for this exhibit. So thank you so much for coming. I'm also pleased to welcome the Dean of the Claire Trevor School of the Arts, Tiffany Anna Lopez. Thank you for being here. And now I'd like to introduce Michael Dessen, who is the chair of the music department, a jazz program coordinator, and director of the Gassmann Electronic Music Studios at UC Irvine. A composer trombonist, Dessen's music has been recognized with awards from Chamber Music America, New Music USA, and the Fromm Foundation. He's worked extensively in telematic music, composing, performing, and co-directing dozens of networked multi-site concerts with international collaborators. Michael will first share a few remarks, and then after that, we're pleased to welcome Anne LeBaron for a musical performance. Anne has recently retired from the faculty of the School of Music at CalArts, the California Institute of the Arts, and she is a West Coast experimentalist who is an innovative performer on the harp. Her compositions include 7 operas, have been performed worldwide, and her awards include the Alpert Award in the Arts, a Fromm Foundation Commission, a Guggenheim, and grants from the NEA and Opera America. And then after Michael and Anne's performance, we have some time for questions from the audience. So with that, I'll welcome Michael to the stage.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you all for coming. I have to say, this is actually super cool. I didn't realize so many people from so many different areas were going to be here, so this is really interesting. I was going to thank all the same people. I'm really grateful to Scott and Oliver for curating this exhibit. What they did is just incredible. I hope you have a chance to see it. And I'm grateful to the libraries, to Kevin, to Cheryl, everybody who works here. They've been amazing. And to our Dean Lopez, who's just an incredible force. And to Anne, who I'll introduce in a little bit, and Drew, another wonderful musician down with Anne. We're going to play some music. But I thought I was asked to give a talk, and so I thought for a while about what to say, and then I have to say I'm really thrilled that Nick Gassmann is here, because that's sort of, I'm an improviser, so I'm not reading a talk here. I've been thinking about it for months, like, what is this exhibit? What is the Gassmann Endowment? What does this all mean? And I had some ideas, and then I was talking with Nick over there just before this, and I thought, well, I got to change up everything now, because I was talking to Nick, and he said something to me I thought was really interesting, which doesn't surprise me at all, and it won't surprise many of you who are students in the arts, especially if you do things that are kind of experimental, right? He said that Remy Gassmann was kind of not exactly, he said oil and water with his father, who was a pharmacist, and that when Remy was presenting these wild sounds and all these, kinds of music that he was developing, it wasn't exactly embraced by the family in a loving embrace of, yes, we support your artistic career, go do that. And this is a story that we all know pretty well, right? Those of us that make weird sounds for a living. And then I'm looking around here and I'm seeing, by the way, it's just so wonderful to meet a Gassmann, because as I'll come back to in a little bit, that name has been associated with such an incredible endowment, literally in the sense of a gift of a foundation that has built so many things here at UCI that I've benefited from as a professor here. I'm in my 18th year, I think, and I've always benefited. I literally am playing on equipment, microphones, things like that are purchased with the Gassmann endowment that belong to UCI and that I get to use because I'm a professor here doing research. I've had Gassmann funds help me bring incredible guest artists. We've had my colleague Chris Dobrian, who I really want to thank, was the first professor here to take over that endowment, and he spent 27 years directing the endowment, building out these incredible studios that we have over in the School of the Arts, the Gassmann Electronic Music Studios, and running the Gassmann Electronic Music series. I've seen probably 100 concerts or more, at least, here at UCI by cutting-edge electronic artists, all sponsored with Gassmann money. So, and those have all been free, open to the public. Those have been going on since the late 90s. Incredible diverse array of artists coming through on that series. And we've used the endowment to build out all these studios, which have been central to this PhD program that Chris and I and some other faculty started, called Integrated Composition, Improvisation, and Technology, that we've been able to bring people from across the world, like Oliver Brown, to do this just cutting-edge, incredible work here that we learn from as faculty, watching them discover things. And we couldn't do it without all of that support. So it's kind of a lot of things coming together here as I see a number of our PhD students and here for the event, and Nick, and just thinking about it all. So as I process all of that, I guess what I want to share with you, I have two kind of agendas. One is to try to give some warm-up or context for what you're about to hear, because some of you are used to it, but some of you, this might sound very strange, what we're going to do. And I always want to kind of ease people into that kind of thing. So that's one agenda. My other agenda is to just a little bit more than I just did, lay out for you why this kind of world of experimental music, why it matters to some of us, and why it matters that it's supported at a place like this, as well as out in the world beyond our campus, and what brings some of us to that. So kind of the same agenda, but I have just some quick comments I'll share, and I tried to think about organizing them. Since I'm talking, I'm not showing you a PowerPoint, thank goodness. The students here are like, no more PowerPoints. So but to help you kind of follow me and organize it, I have 3 keywords. So each, a little window, each is kind of a window into all those things I just mentioned. So the first keyword is sound, right? So sound is something that we all just live in all the time. We're all just, actually even people who have hearing impairments or don't hear sound in the way we do, they actually experience sound. Everybody alive experiences sound, because sound is vibration. Sound is not just what you hear with your ear. It affects you on a physical level. It's actually vibrations that enter your body, primarily for most of us through the ears, but in a lot of other ways too. And the reason I mention sound is because one of the reasons Remy Gassmann's dad thought his sounds were really weird and different is because in the 20th century, a lot of composers like Remy Gassmann, who was a pioneer in this and building on earlier composers earlier in the century, and who established things that later composers would build on, that whole arc of experimentation through the 20th century, in one way, you could think about it as composers in the West in particular, thinking about sound as something that you can actually use as a parameter, as a material to create music with. And you might say, well, isn't all music made of sound? Because it is. Music has to have sound and time. That's basically all you need. But most music, when we think of it, traditional kinds of music, we think of, a melody, a harmony, rhythms that have a beat or a pulse, right? And we think of especially sounds and when we think of melodies and harmonies that you could play the note on the piano and you hear a pitch, we call it, ah, as opposed to ah, you hear different sounds like that, and we sing a melody. You all know melodies, you all know harmony, that kind of traditional way of thinking about music. Well, in the 20th century, composers in the Western world started to think, yeah, I could do that, but instead of using these pitched sounds or even unpitched sounds like percussion, what if I built a piece of music from the sound of a door squeaking and a person sighing? That was a famous piece in the mid 20th century, and you hear it, and you actually, if you go check it out, this kind of music that actually started in the early 20th century, they were really kind of grasping at another way to construct music with sounds, not just with melody, harmony, things like that. And this is actually takes a lot of forms. Maybe some of you heard the music of Charles Ives. Charles Ives was exploring a lot of things in his music, but one would be, what could it sound like if you have a marching band over here and another one a mile away, and you're in the middle of them, hearing them both play different music? What's that sound world like? How does that make me feel? What is it? There were these kind of sound worlds that composers were exploring in all kinds of ways. Many, many interesting composers getting into sound at a level of detail and exploration that previously just had not been explored quite that way, So that's a really characteristic feature of a certain strain of music development in the 20th century. And it's something that it doesn't have to be in competition with melody and harmony and rhythm, but it's just another dimension of music that was built out by composers over the past 100+ years in a way that had never quite been done before in the Western world in such a systematic way. So when you hear music by Remy Gassmann or what we're about to do tonight, just instead of listening, where's the melody, where's the harmony, I can't tap my foot, forget about the things you're used to that aren't there. Just try and experience sound. What's happening with these sounds? What do they feel like? What do they sound like? What kinds of emotions do I get from these sounds? And maybe you don't get any. Maybe you hate it. I always tell my students that's totally fine. Just give it a try. So sound was the first key word. The next key word I have to include. I'm cheating a little bit. It's 2 keywords, but it's really one, which is research. But I want to cheat and put the word creative in front of it. And that's because at a place like this, much of what the university does is research, right? We call all of our work as faculty research. We bring in these PhD students to do research. We train undergrads in all kinds of things, but hope that our research informs what we can give to them in terms of knowledge and perspective. So we are a research university. But for those of us doing these kinds of explorations of new sound worlds, what does it mean to do creative research? What does it mean to actually discover new sounds or new ways to put together sounds or new ways to work in that way in tandem with or integrated with other kinds of music that deal with all the traditional forms that we inherit from much earlier centuries? How do we put these things together? And so creative research is a huge topic around our School of the Arts. We really, in all of our departments, dance, drama, art, music, we're all thinking about what does it mean to do creative art production, to compose, to write plays, to create art, to choreograph, to dance, to perform. All these activities are part of this world of building out new kinds of experiences for people. We use this word art. It's very flexible. We use it all over the place in a lot of ways. But really, so many things can be packed into that. And particularly in this moment, when life is really difficult right now in a lot of ways for a lot of people. There's so many painful things happening in the world. Our students are going through a lot. Our faculty and staff are also going through a lot. It's a very intense time. So in the School of the Arts, I think we and all that we do to explore ways that we can bring people together through this kind of experience, through this exploration of new sound worlds, new art experiences, it's really an important function that we play, but it has a critical dimension, it has a creative, imaginative dimension, it has a playful dimension. It should be fun, Students often forget that, and I have to remind them. it can be, you can have fun, you know, in some of these classes. It's serious too. I want you to practice and get better and go deep and ask the hard questions and confront difficult, complicated things. But also, let's have fun while we're doing it, you know. So I hope you hear us having fun. I know Anne is one of the most fun. You got to go see her operas. They're unbelievably fun, and they're super deep at the same time. So creative research, that was my other keyword. And then my last keyword, and I'll wrap up after that, is community. Or actually, I want to make it plural, communities. And that's because when we think about that arc of musical exploration throughout the 20th century, one of the things that's been a huge through line in my own research, not just as a musician creating new forms of music, but doing research, doing critical thinking about histories, writing scholarly works, and doing things like that, is what I've learned from my teachers and influences about the way that all these different kinds of experimental music and arts communities in the 20th century they were simultaneously all these different sort of communities of people, but they were also in dialogue with each other. They were interacting, they were kind of resonating. And it's a really interesting thing to think about because on the one hand, many times they were separated, often because of the ways that people in our society get separated, right? Race, gender, class, geography. But at the same time, many times they were listening to each other, being inspired by each other. So as an example, the iconic so-called jazz saxophonist, although he didn't like that word, but Charlie Parker, if any of you ever heard of Charlie Parker, he was planning to study with the composer Edgar Varese when he died. That's what he wanted to do. He was listening to Stravinsky's music, but he really wanted to study with a cutting-edge, newer composer, Edgar Varese, who was creating these incredible worlds of sound. And other people in the classical music world were listening to Charlie Parker. Now, Charlie Parker was a black American artist who opened up entire new ways of hearing and playing music, and one of many, many people, not just him, but numerous people in that community. And Edgar Varese and people like that were opening up their other people's ears in different ways through what they were doing. We don't normally think of them in the same way. We don't actually see them, maybe now a little bit more, but in general, especially when I was coming through school, we didn't see them in the same history textbooks. You know, Charlie Parker's over here in jazz history, Edgar Varese and Stravinsky, they're over here in classical music history, right? We don't even really teach them in the same classes sometimes, although I have wonderful colleagues who now do that because we're in 2024 and we can look back and think a little differently. But in fact, it's complicated, right? These are complicated stories. Because some of these people were separated in all these ways through social differences, but at the same time, there was so much cross-fertilization of ideas among all these different communities. So communities is plural because throughout the 20th century, all these artistic communities that explored new things, delved into very new ideas, they were listening to each other and they were influencing each other. And many times the ones that get represented in histories as having moved the medium, to borrow a phrase from a wonderful poet, Nathaniel Mackey, the people who get credited with really pioneering new, brand new, incredible, important things are people who align in the ways that's my timer telling me I'm almost done here, align with institutions and structures of you know, accepted knowledge, that it's a little bit easier for me as a white person, for example, to present myself in a certain way, and if someone, I would say it's very different now in 2024, but 40, 50 years ago, for example, it was very hard if you were a black person in this country coming from jazz traditions, no matter how experimental your music was, you got labeled as a jazz artist. You could be writing really, really weird, crazy things, and people in the jazz world might kick you out and label you as an experimental artist, but in a university like this, you couldn't get a job as a composer. So I'll wrap it up by saying that, you know, I had incredibly good fortune to learn about these things, not just by reading in books, reading theory, reading history, but by studying with people who had a perspective on this from having lived it. So I want to, before I introduce Anne and we play, I just want to say that for me, all of this is a way to honor my teachers, including one of my first teachers, Yusef Lateef, who was a renowned saxophonist and composer. He played with all these iconic jazz people, Art Blakey, you know, he was friends with John Coltrane, that kind of thing. But he also wrote symphonies and made all kinds of unusual sounds, just like I'm about to make. And he was teaching at a university when I got to study with him, but he was a very low-level adjunct part-time professor there, and he had been asking them for years to get a full-time job. And they didn't do it until he was 82 years old, about to retire, and they realized it was very embarrassing. So they gave him a full-time job just for a year or two so they could retire him and look good. But in the 90s, I learned a lot by seeing that this iconic, amazing person who had accomplished so much was still seen as not quite fitting in. He was too weird for the jazz program. He was too jazz and black for the composition program. He just didn't quite make it into the academic structure of things. So it gives me real joy now to see that we have, at a place like UCI, an incredible PhD program where we can bring in all these students, and we can hire people, and we can create a different kind of reality, and we can really think about communities, plural, being a part of how this music evolves. So on that note, I want to introduce my wonderful collaborator, Anne LeBaron, and she'll introduce our other collaborator. She's going to play, we're going to play a duo, then she's going to play a duo with Drew and introduce Drew, and then we'll play a trio, and then we'll have some Q&A. But Anne, Kevin introduced her. I'm not going to read your bio because people want to hear you. But Anne, I just have to say, Anne is incredible. Anne is like, does these, I thought I wrote it down. I just have to tell you this great. Anne comes up with these great things. Like, I got her newsletter the other day, and it just was casually mentioned in a new piece she's doing. What was it? It's called Suction. It's a cyborg. What was the phrase? It was just
one-woman cyborg vacuum cleaner opera.
One-woman cyborg vacuum cleaner opera. I mean, how great is that? So, you know, this is the kind I've been watching Anne do these things for 25 years. I remember watching her give a talk when I was a graduate student, just thinking, wow, about Pope Joan. That was amazing. So Anne is a very creative, and she's brought an electric harp, which is sort of the electric guitar equivalent of the harp, with all these pickups in it. She's going to be affecting it, doing all these things. So I have such admiration, and I'm so grateful to be able to play with Anne again. So please welcome Anne LeBaron to the stage. Yep, just did. You want to test, see if we got sound?
Let's do.
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you very much. I wanted to say a few things about what you just heard and what you're going to hear. But first of all, I'm delighted to be here. I'm honored and privileged to play this concert for you, and thank you for coming out in celebration of the exhibit of Remy Gassmann's extraordinary work. And I want to thank the curators, Scott Stone and Oliver Brown. I want to thank Michael Dessen for inviting me to celebrate the opening of this extraordinary and magnificent exhibit. And also I would like to thank Cheryl Baltes, who has been really amazing to work with in all the preparations for the concert, and we've been in touch for months now. I want to say that as a composer, I was trained in the analog system in a studio modeled on the storied Columbia Princeton Music Studio. And my teachers were Bülent Arel from Turkey and Daria Simigan. Now, you mentioned Varese. Bülent Arel worked on the electronic component of Varese's great piece, Desert, or Deserts, in the English version of it. And he was also claimed as an influence by none other than Frank Zappa. So that's who I studied with, and I could say much more, but I won't. I will say one thing. So Remy Gassmann wrote electronic music for dance. And when I listened to it as part of my research for this concert, I heard so many similarities between what my teacher, Bülent Arel, and Daria Simigan, another teacher at Stony Brook, this was at Stony Brook University. Their electronic music was much like Gassmann's, also for dance, frequently written for Mimi Gerard's dance company in New York. And also, it sounds like jeweled tones, a very precise jeweled tones, much in the same way that Remy Gassmann's music for dance affected me when I heard it. So a couple of words about what you just heard and about that harp that you see. Okay, first of all, the harp is, I very rarely play it. It's heavy because it's a solid body electric harp, and I purchased it thanks to my Guggenheim, which you mentioned, so that helped me with it. But I also ordered it to be painted this custom red color, Chinese lacquer red, and it was the first electric harp. Now you see them at LA Phil. You know, they became very popular for the company Lion and Healy. Did I ever get any kind of any kind of cut of that? No. But I think they loved seeing what it looked like. And so it's very special for me to play it this evening. And what you're hearing is not only preparations, and frequently I prepare or play the harp with found objects. So the skeleton was a found object that on a walk on the Paseo in my neighborhood that I came across a couple of days ago. And I thought, let's check this out, see what it can do. So it's like my life and my playing evolve together. So I think the other thing I want to say is that the piece I just played with Michael, and I adore playing with Michael. We don't get a chance to do so very much, but I have such respect and admiration for him as a musician and a teacher. So I created a piece for him in a series of pieces called Infrathins, which comes from a Marcel Duchamp kind of concept, let's say. And the concept is basically, Duchamp defined infrathin as the difference between two mass-produced objects from the same mold. It's an infrathin when the maximum precision is obtained. That means that two objects that are almost, and we're talking visual, but it's also conceptual. For instance, if you're sitting on a chair and you get up, the warmth of the air where you were sitting is an infrathin. Although infrathin, according to Duchamp, cannot be defined. So I decided to explore it musically, and I've written these various, they're like text scores, or graphic scores too, and they give the players ideas about how to approach and leave the infrathin. So that's what we just played, and the next two pieces will be a duo with my former student, Drew Sensue Weinstein, who is an absolutely amazing sound designer and also composer, and who has worked a lot with dance in New York and theater. So I asked Drew to come in for this duo because I had just made recordings of a tracker organ at the Burns House in Santa Monica Canyons. It's in a house, and I thought the sounds were so remarkable, I knew Drew could work with me to get amazing things from them. So we're going to do a duo, basically using those tracker organ sounds with some other things that Drew will also do to modify the sounds. And after that, we will play a trio, Michael and Drew and myself. So thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you so much for that wonderful performance and that fascinating exploration of sound. That was really something that's different for the libraries. We really enjoyed it. So at this time, we're running just a few minutes late, so we have time for about 2 questions. I see one person here who already has her hand raised, so if you have a question for Anne, Michael, or Drew, please go ahead.
For all of you, when you write this out, how does it look? Are you part of the spontaneity? Some of it is planned? How does that work?
We don't write it out. So
That would be a nightmare.
What would you write out? I'd love to see it. I mean, there is music that probably sounds similar to this that is written out. This isn't. We improvised. But there's music that might strike you as very similar that is written out. That's part of contemporary music too. And I would say, actually, the interesting thing is it takes many forms. Many forms. Some people write very meticulous. It looks like normal staff music, but with incredible detail to get sounds kind of like these. Other people write more pictorial. Actually, the best way to answer that is check out the exhibit. I mean, there's a whole thing there on graphic scores and the whole history. So if you want to think about notation as a part of this kind of practice, that's a wonderful place to start, curated by our incredible curators. But
That's true. But
this wasn't written out.
I can say that there was planning. Like, in other words, Drew and I rehearsed together, and I made the graphic score for Michael and I to have the concept for the in for thin piece that we did. So it's not like it all came out of thin air, you know. Now the third piece, yes, that was completely improvised. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Great. One more question. Yes, at the back.
I want to know, as someone who plays music or someone who just listens to music, you've never played this kind of music or listened to it before, what kind of change in mindset does one need to have to be able to either listen to this and enjoy it or experience it as it should be experienced, or how does one have to change their mindset in order to play it if they've never done anything like that before?
Find like-minded friends and play. That's how I got started 50 years ago. And this was in a little town in Alabama. And we were the Renegades. And our influences were Derek Bailey, Evan Parker, and John Coltrane, and many others. But that's what I would advise you to do. Yeah.
I can talk to him anytime. But I'll tell. I took an improv seminar with George Lewis, a fantastic musician, one of my other teachers at UC San Diego many, many years ago, and he paired us in the first day. It was an open improvisation class, and he paired me. I was a new PhD student. I was 30 years old. I played on records. I had a lot of experience. I thought I was all good and everything, and could play jazz and all these things. And he paired me to play a duo with a freshman contrabass player who could barely play his instrument but was really into things like this and was making all these scratchy sounds and things. I didn't know what to do, so I just played my beautiful tones and my melodies and my things. And then I thought that the teacher, this renowned teacher, was going to, critique the freshman, but instead he just honed in on me. He said, "Well, did you hear that sound he made at the beginning when he went, can you do that?" I was like, not really. I tried to make a sound like that. I couldn't do it. He said, "Well, what about that other one when he went, I couldn't do it." He said, "Well, you know what you need to do, Michael? You need to get those records they have in the library." These days we had records, but get those records they have for movies with all the sound effects of the animals and go into the practice room. Just spend a month practicing with the animal sounds, like get the frog, get the bird, get the elephant and the horse, and just try and imitate them, and you'll expand your vocabulary. And he said, the reason if you want to do that, if you expand your vocabulary of sounds, you can play with more people because there are people who make other sounds than you're used to. And if you have a wider range of things you can do, then you're more able to interact with more kinds of people. So from his perspective, it wasn't about you get really good at a kind of music and then you go out and be the best at that. Music, for him, being an improviser meant you continually expand your toolkit so that you can actually work with anybody. And, that can mean many, many things, but you have to be able to respond, so you have to have a broad vocabulary. So that was really transformative for me just to think about it that way, Great question, though, Nico. We'll be talking.
Thank you. I know there are lots more questions, and hopefully you have a chance to ask them during the reception. Just a few quick closing remarks, and we'll get you to the exhibit and the reception. So that concludes the Q&A portion. Thank you. That was an exceptional performance. We appreciate Anne and Michael and Drew for being here and sharing this with us, and for sharing the impact of the Gassmann's endowment has had on UCI. especially on the ICIT graduate program. UCI Libraries is proud to be home to the Remy Gassmann papers and other collections so meaningful to UCI and to the surrounding community. Throughout the year, events, programs, and events like these would not be possible without the support from the UCI Libraries Gateway Society, and I'm delighted to see so many Gateway Society members with us tonight. Your continued partnership helps support UCI's world-class research, teaching, and patient care. It supports the library's role as a major information resource for the community and sponsors public programs such as today's event. For more information about the Libraries Gateway Society, you can pick up a brochure at our registration table or see Angelica Vogel, our UCI Libraries Associate Director for Development. So now it's time to view the exhibit in the lobby and enjoy refreshments in the Holden Room over by the checkout desk on the left-hand side. Please join me in a final round of thanks for Michael, Ann, Drew, Scott, Oliver, and all the UCI Library staff and students who helped with today's event. Thank you.